Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Soul Centered CEO Show. I'm so excited to be back this week and to be joined by my new and fabulous friend, Larry Hagner. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Hey, what's going on? How are you?
Wonderful. It's so good to have you. I love getting to schedule these structured, unstructured conversations with some wonderful people, and so I'm so excited to have you on today. You obviously have an amazing podcast, and we want to dive in and talk about that. But I'd really like to just start off, Larry, with a little bit about your story, right? You host this incredible podcast, The Dad Edge. You do a lot of work with men and that want to be better husbands, better partners, better parents. And I know that just from my experience with you, you have a pretty powerful story for how you actually created this work and how you kind of got on this path. Do you want to maybe take a minute and share with us a little bit about your journey on where you were to where you are now and how this all came about?
I can definitely do that. So my mom and biological father, they were married in, I think, like 71. And then I was born in 75. And then after I was born, they got divorced. And then I never saw him after that. And I mean, so yeah, and just kind of back up a little bit, like, so if we're talking about how Dad Edge came about, it really started with my childhood. Um, the funny thing, there's kind of a funny element to this story because I'm 45 years old and I remember like it was yesterday being in preschool, and I remember men coming to pick up kids from school, and I knew what a dad was. I was like, oh, that's must be, but my mom hasn't found us a dad yet. Like literally, that was my understanding. Like moms go out and find dads. And I'll never forget the very first time that my mom brought home a man. She had been dating him from work. And this is like 1979. And by the way, I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. Like I didn't really care. Like me and my mom had a good relationship. And I was just like, she just hasn't found a dad yet. No worries.
Yeah.
And this guy comes over, and I think she'd been dating him for a little bit. And he was a white collar software engineer. And so this guy walks in our house, and he's wearing, like, his hair's feathered, like
Wow.
1979, right? He's got the handlebar mustache.
Looking smooth.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. The double Windsor tie, vest underneath that, trench coat, briefcase. And it was really interesting, like being at that age and like seeing a man come walking through my door. And I was like, wow, the presence of of a male figure in my house was like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so my mom introduces me to him. And my very first question was, are you going to be my dad? Like literally, like, are you going to be my dad?
Bless your heart.
Right. And I think this guy, and I remember like the oxygen being like sucked out of the room. Like, oh my, like my mom, I think was like, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that. And like, this guy didn't know what to say.
Right.
And so fast forward a year, they got married.
Okay.
And I was like, man, this is so cool. My mom quit her job. Um, she got to stay home with me. Like it was cool. But what I can tell you is that he was one of the nicest guys I've ever known. Like very polite, big on manners, former military, but he drank a lot too. So like when he drank, like things got really, really dark at my house. Like there were beatings, there was name calling, there was abuse, like there was a lot of crazy stuff that happened. And they were together until I was 10. And every year they were together, it just got progressively just worse and worse and worse. And he left after they got divorced. I haven't seen him since. And that was crazy, right? To see like that relationship disintegrate completely, and then he was gone. So I started asking a lot of questions at that time, and I was like, wait a second, like I know about the birds and the bees, like where did I come from? Right? I know he wasn't my dad, so where did I come from? My mom was like, oh, I was actually married before, and you have another dad, and you actually have the same name as he does. And she showed me photos, and I'm like, it was very surreal. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then when I was 12, as fate would have it, I ran into him by accident. I knew his name, and I won't go into it for the sake of time, but I knew his name, and we were at the same rec center, and I knew his name, and we met. And at the time, he was married for I think 5 or 6 years, and then he had a 2-year-old son, another one on the way. And I was just overjoyed. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. Like I get to have a relationship with my real father. And I called him dad right out of the gate, and spent time at his house with his wife and my half brother. And I noticed though, the weird thing was, is our relationship lasted 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way I can describe like the last month was when you're dating someone and they're not into you anymore. You just sort of feel the vibe. You kind of sense that it's only a matter of time before this person breaks up with me or the relationship comes to an end.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly what words were said, but I remember picking up the phone at 12 years old and just being like, hey, like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like something's not right. I don't remember what words were used, but after that conversation, we went our separate ways, and that was horrible. I kind of gave up at that point in my
Yeah.
life. I emotionally overate. I failed the eighth grade. I had to do eighth grade twice.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and then my mom kind of was always dating somebody who was a big partier and a big drinker, and it was just like it was crazy.
Yeah.
And then I finally got my act together. Went to high school, went to college, graduated college, went on to marry my college sweetheart. And then I'll finish the story here. When I was 30, two things happened. Number one, what I found out is if you are in a Starbucks, two things are guaranteed. Number one, you will always pay too much for coffee.
Always.
And number two, you might run into a biological parent that you haven't seen in 18 years.
Mm.
So that was pretty crazy. So my dad, I was there for a business meeting, came walking in. I knew exactly who he was. It had been 18 years.
Wow.
And we connected at that point, and we've had a relationship for the past 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
But how Dad Edge came about is every single relationship my mom was in, every guy who was a father figure, even my biological one, there was always like serious toxicity issues, like partying and drugs and alcohol and just it was abuse. And it was just like, and I told myself, I was like, man, on my watch this won't happen. Like, I'm going to be married, I'll be married once. I'm not going to be married 3 and 4 times like my mom. um, and I'm going to be a good father. And what I found out is after I had my first two boys, because I have four, I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Dad Edge and Good Dad Project really started when my 13-year-old was 4 at the time. And it really started with a dark moment. So he was 4 years old, and everything that I had set out to do as a father, to be a good father, none of it was coming true. None of it. I wasn't abusive, and I wasn't calling anybody names, and I wasn't hitting anybody, but I just sort of did fatherhood from like way out here. Like, I got all my validation in the workplace, and I just sort of did this fatherhood thing from a big arm's length distance. And my 4-year-old stepped out of line. I spanked him, and he hit the ground. And I remember like going like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I just hit this kid this hard. And he hit the ground, and I went to go pick him up, and he looked at me like I was a monster. Like, what'd you just do to me? And in that moment, I saw myself as a kid, because I remember feeling like that.
Yeah.
And my wife sat me down, and she was like, you know what? She's like, I love you. You're a good man, and you have so much potential to be a good father, and you're just not doing it. And I kind of feel like a single parent over here, and you really just need to get your act together. And it was in that moment. And my wife is very low drama. She will not speak up like that unless she really means it. I took that very seriously. And I did what every adult does when they have a dark moment. I went in my office and got on social media to distract myself from what just happened. And I was on Facebook, and I remember seeing this button in the left hand corner said create a page. And in that moment, I created a page called the Good Dad Project, and I was the project. I was like, you know what? I'm super successful in my career. I'm always being promoted. I'm always being praised. I'm never. I'm a student of my job. Like, I'm never too shy to speak up and be like, hey, I want more leadership training. Hey, I want more sales experience. I want more. Like just train me. I want to learn. And I thought to myself, I was like, well, what if I looked at that? What if I looked at fatherhood and marriage the same way? I
Mm.
just looked at it as like, how can I learn the skills to do this? And that page became kind of public accountability to share one thing that I was learning every day.
Mm.
That turned into a following in 2013, turned into a blog. 2015, I wrote my first book, started a podcast in 2015, and been podcasting ever since. It's been 6 years, and it's been quite a journey for sure. Hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows, under my own house. It's always will be a learning experience. But I asked my wife, and I'll say this last thing, and then we can move on to whatever questions you have. But I asked my wife like a couple of weeks ago, we were on a date. I said, hey, let me ask you something. I was like, where do you think we would be without Dad Edge? She didn't even hesitate. She goes, divorced, which shocked me because there's not one person, not one, in her entire family history that's ever been divorced. Not one. And I was like, wow. I was like, that's pretty bold for you to say. No one in your family's ever been divorced. She's like, well, I didn't want to be divorced. She goes, and I honestly, I didn't think we would, but I thought that we had a good shot at probably being divorced. So yeah.
Wow. Okay, so first of all, it's an incredible story. I find it so fascinating, you know, in these conversations, how frequently the the greatest suffering or the greatest sadness or the greatest the breakdown always leads to the breakthrough, and how people end up creating such a blessing in their work from those dark nights of the soul, those hardest moments. So I just love that you are now being able to help so many other men um, in that same place, right? They're good men. They're just not. They're maybe just not nailing the marriage game or the parenting game the way they would like to. And what a gift that you've been able to share your wisdom and your learning with them, and hopefully help them avoid that same path as well. So wow, okay, I love this. um, okay, so in your journey and now in this work that you're doing, what do you see, like in terms of your listeners, or people that are in your community? How are they showing up, and how are they making changes, and what are some of those stories that you hear, right, of transformation? Because I'm sure you get them all the time.
We do. I'm really blessed to open up my email every day and usually see something from, it's either a podcast listener or somebody in our, Dad Edge Alliance, which is our mastermind community, or something where you see some guys succeeding. And every single week in our mastermind community, we have this thing called Wednesday. So instead of Wednesday, it's Wins Day.
Yeah.
So we get to see all these really cool wins that men are having. What I can tell you is uh, we require men to apply to be a part of our mastermind. And what I've noticed is 8 out of 10 applications are men who want to create an extraordinary marriage. Like that's what's on their mind and heart, is to create an incredible connection with their wives. I think just in society alone, like I think men kind of get a bad rep that they're not really in their relationship. But what I can tell you is, for the most part, men want to fix the problems under their own roof. They don't want to stray. They really don't. Like they really want a great relationship with their wife,
Yeah.
at the core of who they are. But I will tell you, the wins that we see as it relates to marriage. Let's just take that one for instance. There are 4 elements to an extraordinary marriage. The first one is self-care. You have to take care of yourself so you can take care of the other person. It's not, you can't pour from an empty cup. You just can't do it. And unfortunately, men in particular will always be like, it's all about them. I don't even count anymore. And I think that's a huge disservice, because we're showing up as the overwhelmed, burnt out of ourselves because we don't take that time for self-care.
Yep. Totally agree.
The second element is partnership. Partnership is more like the business side of marriage. So it's like the finances, the schedules. You take this kid here, I'll take this kid there. I'll do dinner, you clean up. Like it's the roles, right? This is where about 50% of arguments actually happen, because this is where expectation lies. Like, why am I doing dinner? She should do it this time. Or why am I getting the car fixed? It's her car. It's like, why am I doing this or that? Shouldn't it be her turn or his turn?
Right.
So having roles identified is a really big deal and something that we gloss over. The third element is friendship. So that's like, hey, at the end of the day, are we friends? Like, are we in each other's fan club? Are we buddies? Like, are we friends? Right. And then the fourth is intimacy and lovers, and that physical and emotional part of our relationship. Right. But underneath those 4 pillars is communication. And communication. And whenever you ask any man, like, hey, when it comes to communication, what do you want? And they'll use 2 words almost every time: more or better. I want better communication, or I want more communication. And then when you press and say, well, what does that mean? And they're like, I don't know. I want us to be able to talk deeper about stuff. I was like, well, what does that look like? And they'll be like, I don't know. I just want us to be able to share anything with each other and it's okay. Okay, well, why isn't that happening now? And they'll both be like, I have no idea. So within communication, you have to have certain skill sets, like tactical empathy is one. Tactical empathy is a way to allow the other person to feel seen, heard, and connected, right? And that's really big for women, to feel seen and heard and connected.
Everything.
Everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And most men gloss over that, or
Right.
will jump right to, hey, let me fix your problem for you. And nothing, like a woman doesn't feel connected to a man. It's like, well, this is how we should do it, right? Or this is what you should do.
Mhm.
Another one is emotional validation. Another one is creating an environment of psychological safety. So to answer your question, when men understand, oh, wait, so there's skill sets actually in marriage, like there's actually a practice and a skill set that I can learn, like tactical empathy,
Yeah.
and I can help my wife and I identify what our roles are. So we're not fighting over the small stuff and we're not building up walls of resentment because we have so much expectation on each other. Like those are the wins that we see all the time. Like, I'm like, hey, my wife came home. She had a really, really bad day and I didn't fix her problem. I just created space for her and I listened to her and I emotionally validated her. And she thought I was like the most amazing guy on the planet. And then we had like this amazing sex afterwards. And he's like, and guys will be like, and that hasn't happened. And I can't remember when, but I used these skill sets to connect with her instead of thinking that I had to do what I used to always do.
Mm, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, and you're so right. It's if you can create the foundational teaching or like just the framework. Here's the framework, right? And this is how you overlay it onto all these different scenarios and situations. You're giving them actual skills and resources that they can use to create the marriages that they've been dreaming of, right? And so many people, like you said, the expectation part is, I think, so huge in every relationship, right? Whether it be romantic and intimate or anything, really, being able to clearly communicate and set expectations and have those agreements, it's game changing. And then you think about how much more time you can spend in joy and in pleasure and having fun when you can eliminate all of that just underlying crap that you have to get through to get there. So I love it. It's so powerful, and I think that um, what you're doing in the realm of obviously the marriage piece, but then also the dad piece, right? Helping them show up in a way that they'll be proud of themselves and how they've always wanted to show up, and giving them the opportunity to do that. So when you're, for example, in your alliance, in your mastermind community, are those all um, are they all dads, or are they just whoever feels called to be part of it? Like it can be either way.
So it's been a fascinating adventure because like some of these guys I'm actually kind of jealous of. I always say that I wasted the first 6 years of my kid's life because at the time my older one was 6 and I was completely lost. We have guys joining the community who aren't even dads yet. Like their wife is pregnant with their first one and they're like, oh man, I just figured I'd join this because my wife's pregnant and I just want a head start. I'm like, man, I
That's
was
so
like,
cool.
it is. I mean, I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm like, man, if I had that resource when my kids weren't even here yet, my God, I would have spent so much less time in camp frustration, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
camp floundering, right?
Yep.
But most of them are dads. Some of them, their wives are expecting. We have one guy who's in there. He's been a part of the group for well over a year. He's 21.
Oh my
His
God.
name's his name's Jake. We call him the kid, and he applied to be a part of the group. And I had this Zoom call with him, for this application. And I was like, and he popped on the screen and he looked like this really young guy. And I'm like, hey man, I was like, so tell me about your wife. And he's like, oh, I'm not married. I was like, okay. I was like, well, tell me about your kids. And he's like, I don't have any kids. And I was like, do you have any idea what you applied for? And he goes, yeah, of course I do. He goes, I've been listening to your podcast forever.
Yeah.
And I was like, how old are you? And he's like, I'm 21. I was like, why do you want to be a part of this? I don't understand.
Yeah.
He's like, I didn't really have, a stable father figure growing up. He's like, and I just want a head start. And I'm nowhere near, getting married or anything like that. I just want to be around guys who are ahead of me. And this sounds really horrible, like really, really horrible, but I'll admit what I said to him. I was like, man, I really appreciate that. I was like, but listen, our group isn't for you. I was like, it's for guys who are, dads are expecting. And he's like, oh, he's like, okay. And then I thought about it and I was like, why would I say that to a guy? Like literally, if a guy is hungry to learn this stuff before he even gets married or has a serious relationship, like who am I to tell him no? In fact, like looking back on it, would I have wanted this education when I was 21? Like, heck yeah, I would have. So I actually texted him the next day. I'm like, hey man, I was like, I think I made a mistake. I was like, listen, if you want to be a part of this, like, who am I to tell you no? Like, if you really want to like learn from guys who are way ahead of you in life, so it'll set you up for further success, I'm fine with that. And he's like, awesome. Where do I sign up? And he signed up. And I was like, in a way, I stepped away from that conversation. I was like, I can't believe I told that guy no. Like, I'd be robbing him of probably one of the most precious educational experiences of his life. He's been here for over a year.
Oh, wow. So powerful and so cool because you're right. Like I like to think of it in terms of like consolidating suffering. Like if I can teach you things and you can learn from my mistakes and do things differently at a younger age, I mean, what a huge blessing to hopefully he won't ever have to go down a lot of those paths and he can have a head start in such a beautiful and supported way, And I think to me that's what's so powerful about the work that you're doing too is you're creating those opportunities um, for connection and probably a level of vulnerability that a lot of men have maybe never had the space to share. I know when we met at the event in Montana a few months ago, it was like instant intimacy, like instant vulnerability, right? Not everyone's used to that, and I think it's wonderful that you're giving them the space to be able to be seen and heard and connected, maybe in a way they never have been before. So
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I know that you've got a lot of incredible offerings and things and resources really for men, wherever they are on their journey. Obviously you have the podcast. We're going to drop the link to that in the notes here when this is live. But are there other things and other resources? Obviously you just published another book. Do you want to share a little bit about maybe some of those things that you've created as resources for men?
Yeah. I mean, so the podcast obviously has been such an amazing learning experience. I always say that the podcast is a front row seat to the most invaluable education I've ever had. Um, I think I have over 730 episodes that have been recorded. So experts in their field. And one thing that I've noticed has just been a huge epidemic in our culture today is screens and kids and even adults.
Yeah.
So I've interviewed several people who have been experts on the topic of the addictive nature of screens, what it does to the brain, how it impacts learning, how it impacts anxiety and depression and anger and all these different things, right? And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, screens can be like the most powerful babysitter on the planet, right? But at the same time, it can also really be a detriment to our kids. So I wrote this book called Screen Time: The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and it's a kid's book. And the
Mhm.
book is meant for a parent to read it to their kids. And I
Yeah.
would say the age range is anywhere from probably like 4 or 5 to 10. I mean, even like little kids can read it. But what it really does is it helps educate the kid and the parent on like why screens can be great. I mean,
Yeah.
because there are several reasons. Like technology can really be a blessing. Like how FaceTime and if you don't know how to fix your furnace, you can YouTube it. I mean, like literally, like there's a device that has all the answers that you ever need, right? So screens can be a really cool thing. It can also be something that too much screen time can shut off what's called the producer part of the brain or the creator part of the brain. You become what's called a consumer. So if you're watching content constantly on a screen, you kids will have a hard time problem solving at school. They have problems with grades because they don't know how to think through things because they're so used to things being just fed to
Right.
them. Artistic ability and creation and that kind of thing. Like kids, you hand them a blank piece of paper, you're like, hey, draw something. And they're like, I can't.
Yeah.
They don't know how to do that. So the screen time book is all about educating the good things about screens. And then what would happen if there's too much screen time. And I wrote it in such a way where it's funny.
Yeah.
And I wrote it in such a way where it's lighthearted, but you can also feel and learn like the serious undertones of it.
Yeah.
And then the last page is actually something you can tear out and frame. And it's like, these are our family rules around screens. So
Oh, awesome.
it, it, allows the family to decide, like, what they're going to do. So like, for instance, the first rule is we're not going to have any screen times during these times. And you can identify, like, so like dinner time,
Mm-hmm.
or Sunday family fun day or something like that.
Right.
Um, there's also another one in here called screen free family day of the week is, and you can identify what that is. Our screen time limit for video games or tablet is blank per day. So you can fill that out.
Yeah.
Um, and we're not on our phones between the hours of blank and blank every day. So like in our house, 5 to 8, in our house. And then there's the other thing too, like, so the final thing I'll say about this is it's the dreaded words that any kid says that parents hate to hear. And it's two of them. I'm bored.
Yeah.
And what I'll tell you about I'm bored is a really good sign. In fact, I love when my kids say I'm bored because
Mhm.
that gives them an opportunity to then be creative and do something.
Yeah.
So like when they say I'm bored, the fifth rule here is instead of being on a screen, I can do any of these fun things below that make me happy. And there's 4 lines. So what the kid will do is they'll identify 4 go-to items that they can go do instead of a screen.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that my kid did, it was yesterday. He was in the car ride home from our camping trip, and I turned off the movie in the minivan, and he was like, "I'm bored." I was like, "Well, you got your crayons back there." I was like, "Why don't you draw something?" And he's 7, and he's like, "Okay." And he drew me this thing. It says, "I love you, Dad." And then you open it up, and it was a picture that he drew of our camping trip. So it was the tent and the fire. He even had
Mhm.
like my hat on, and he had then him and his little brother, and then we were down by the beach and like on a boat, and like I was like, oh my God. I was like, it actually kind of like choked me up. I was like, this is like the best thing ever. And it all came out of like, hey, we're not watching screens right now. Can you do something creative? And he
Yeah.
did.
I love it. Oh, that's so good. Okay. So we'll want to make sure we put the link to that as well. And then you have and the other book too. Do you want to share a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so I've got 2 other books. One is it's another kid's book. It's called Daddy Will Always Love You and Protect You. It's just a way a dad can read a book to a kid and be able to share some things that is might be hard for him to do, like on the fly.
Yep.
But it obviously it shows pictures, and it's like these 2 bears, and talks about like, when dad has a bad day at work, I still love you. So I'll always love you. I'll always protect you. Or like when you make a mistake, and there's there's this page where one of the bears broke a flower pot, and he's like, I'll still always love you and protect you.
Right.
So like it's a way that a dad can articulate his love and protection for his kids no matter what.
Yeah.
And then my other book out there is The Dad Edge. And that I wrote that one back in 2015, but it was basically just a very basic book on, it's 9 chapters long,
Yeah.
on just how you can connect with your kids, how you can connect with your wife, work-life integration, how to get over small stuff, how to get over really, really big and traumatic things at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, I really just wrote that book as if I was having a conversation with myself like 10 years ago, like, and what advice I would have given myself.
Yeah. Oh, it's so powerful. This might be perfect timing if we can get this in time for get this out for Father's Day. Somebody might be able to pick up a couple of these for their dads for the holiday. That'd be lovely.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so excited just to get an even deeper dive into your world and into the work that you're doing, and it's so powerful and so important. And I hope that you know what a ripple effect you're creating by showing up and doing 700 plus episodes and writing the books and creating the resources. It's a much needed and a powerful way to create massive change, not just for the men, but for their families and generations, really. You're changing generations. So that's really, really amazing. So thank you so much, Larry, for your time today.
Well,
Appreciate it.
thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thanks so much, you guys, for tuning in this week. And we look forward to the next week's episode.